Upon reviewing the modernist era, it can be safely argued that many of the poets of that time felt alienated. The innovation that came with the early 20th century was feared just as much as it was embraced. T.S. Eliot stands as a poet notorious for his disillusionment towards the world around him. In famed works such as The Waste Land and the love story of J. Alfred Prufrock, Eliot presents a world that is fragmented. The chaos that proceeded in the aftermath of World War I is felt in much of his early work. This essence was maintained even well after his conversion to Anglo-Christianity. In addition to alienation, a research scholar, Andy Marak, argues that in Eliot's poetry one can find struggles of a suffering soul and his yearnings for the union with the divine. This can be found in his 1927 poem Journey of the Magi, which was written shortly after his conversion. It retells a well-known biblical story, with Eliot opting to encase it in darkness. His story evokes a loneliness and alienation that Eliot likely felt in real life, as he tries to maintain his faith in a world that has been decimated. The first stanza is riddled with weariness. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year. The immense hardship the Magi experience is established immediately. The sheer length of their journey is emphasized repeatedly. Even the camels they ride on are sore-footed. They fantasize about the warmth of summertime, in stark contrast with the very dead of winter that they now tread. There are few moments in which their faith is rewarded. Not even the natural world accepts them. It doesn't stop at the weather, for the cities are hostile as well, and the towns are unfriendly. They've reached their destination, and yet the feeling of alienation only permeates further. Eliot states that the night fires are going out. In other words, the world is closing itself off on the spiritual ones. He speaks ill of inflation. The villages are dirty and charging high prices. They prefer to sleep in snatches in an effort to remain separated from the unwelcoming civilization. Unfortunately, even the voices in their heads are telling them that this is all folly. The Magi feel hopeless enough that they even prefer to travel in the dead of night to avoid the hostility that haunts them at every turn. From the first stanza, Eliot establishes a world that doesn't accept spirituality. His world is materialistic and dark. The protagonist is fighting a seemingly losing battle in a world that has changed drastically from what he viewed as comfortable. The plot progresses in the second stanza. The Magi continue their journey at the crack of dawn. The time of day is used to symbolize their mood. At night time they are cold and isolated. Their situation improves as the sun rises. The valley is described as temperate. It is now comfortable. They're quickly approaching enlightenment. An old white horse galloped away in the meadow, it says once. The imagery becomes lush and freeing, now that they are surrounded by the natural environment. The Magi in question are even represented as free trees in the low sky. Their faith makes them part of the environment. They come across a tavern with the vine leaves over the lintel, a sign of purity. This stanza builds to the moment where they finally arrive to witness Jesus' birth. Eliot chooses to leave this portion of the story ambiguous. He says, finding the place, it was, as you may say, satisfactory. Barry Spur argues that the use of the word satisfactory has both a superficial and profound meaning. It vastly juxtaposes the rich detail that preceded it, which implies a sense of disappointment, like the experience did not meet their spiritual expectations. Their escape from isolation comes and goes in an instant, if you will. The ambiguity is maintained through to the end, as the protagonist questions the journey many years later. He remembers it vividly, for he often contemplates what the journey meant for them. He witnessed the birth of new Christianity, and yet he remains unfulfilled, to the point where he's beginning to believe that his time on earth is now complete. He says, this birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. This transcendental experience has only led to more questions. The sense of isolation has not been deterred. All they've learned is that they no longer have a place in this world. They returned to their kingdom, but they were no longer at ease. They're the old guard now, unwelcome to the outside world, and no longer needed to spread God's word. The protagonist now sees a world led by aliens, which is Eliot's way of describing the new wave of Christian believers. The poem ends with the protagonist stating that he shall be glad of another death, which would bring him away from here. It can be argued that Eliot wrote this poem as a means of exploring his newfound faith. In doing so, he found himself questioning his place in this world. He utilizes his signature dense imagery to paint a picture of a figure seeking renewal and finding it in death. His spiritual awakening doesn't lead him to feel any better about the world around him, for all he has left to look forward to is the afterlife. Not even a spiritual purpose can shake the feeling of alienation that permeated the modernist era.